Imagine walking across a wide open snowfield. The sky is clear, your friends are just minutes behind you, and there is absolutely nowhere to hide. You take a step, and then you are simply gone. This is exactly what happened to 69-year-old Carl Landers in May 1999. He was a highly experienced climber trying to summit Mount Shasta in Northern California. Feeling a bit unwell, he told his climbing partners he was going to hike ahead of the group to get a head start. He walked out onto a massive, coverless expanse of alpine snow. When his friends packed up their tent and followed his route just a short time later, Landers had vanished. A massive search operation immediately locked down the mountain. Over 70 people scoured the grid. Search and rescue teams deployed helicopters with thermal imaging and brought in bloodhounds. They found zero trace of his body, no abandoned gear, and no exit tracks leading away from his path. Cases like this create a terrifying vacuum of logic. When a human being seems to evaporate into thin air, leaving no physical evidence behind, we are forced to ask how that is physically possible. This is Mount Shasta. Standing in near total isolation at over 14,000 feet, this dormant volcano looms over Northern California. And for centuries, its massive, steaming peaks have acted as a blank canvas for our deepest anxieties and wildest legends. Long before European settlers arrived, the indigenous Modoc and Wintu tribes passed down stories of ancient giant spirits residing deep within the mountain, entities tasked with holding the entire universe in balance. As the 20th century rolled in, the legends only grew stranger. In 1934, a man calling himself J.C. Brown claimed to have discovered a subterranean city buried deep inside the mountain. He insisted it belonged to a lost race of Lemurians and was filled with ancient treasure. Brown successfully recruited a team of 80 men to excavate the site. But on the morning the expedition was supposed to depart, Brown never showed up. He disappeared entirely and was never heard from again. Today, that legacy lives on through internet sleuths and databases like the Missing 411 Project, which diligently track people who go missing in the wilderness under seemingly impossible circumstances, with Mount Shasta acting as a recurring hotspot. Mount Shasta operates as an epicenter for the unknown. When we face environments that dwarf us, we actively project our deepest fears onto the landscape. All of this lore recently culminated in a modern, surprisingly formal theory attempting to explain these vanishings, the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis. This is a recent academic paper titled The Cryptoterrestrial Hypothesis. Authored by researchers associated with Harvard and Montana Technological University, it explores the idea that advanced non-human intelligences might actually live in stealth right here on Earth, specifically underground. And on page 12, the paper specifically cites Mount Shasta's unusual activity and history of disappearances, pointing to the volcano as a potential habitat for these concealed entities. Taken to its extreme by online communities, the hypothesis suggests that missing hikers like Carl Landers aren't getting lost. They are being abducted into subterranean bases hidden deep inside the mountain's dormant magma chambers. But do we really need to invoke hidden underground civilizations to explain why fragile human bodies fail in extreme wilderness environments? When you look past the supernatural message boards and pull the actual search and rescue files for Carl Landers, a very different, highly documented medical reality emerges. Landers was 69 years old and lived close to sea level. He was completely unacclimated to the extreme altitude of Mount Shasta, hot chocolate, and a bagel. His climbing partners reported extreme cognitive impairment. Instead of acting like an experienced mountaineer, Landers was caught staring blankly into space. When told he should start walking, he offered only a confused "okay" before wandering off alone. This elevation chart illustrates human physiology as it climbs. Passing the 7,000-foot threshold, oxygen levels plummet, causing high-altitude psychosis. The brain misfires, and climbers experience profound spatial confusion and vivid hallucinations, conversing with invisible companions, known as third man syndrome. Combine that severe hypoxia with the freezing temperatures of a mountain peak, and victims often develop hypothermia. As their core temperature drops, the brain's hypothalamus malfunctions, making victims feel burning hot. This triggers paradoxical undressing, where confused, freezing people strip off their heavy winter gear and discard it in the snow. The mountain did not open a magical portal. The extreme lack of oxygen and the freezing temperatures simply systematically dismantled Carl Lander's mind and body. Using that established medical data, we can reconstruct his final moments. Driven by severe stomach illness and seeking privacy, Landers likely stepped off the main, heavily trafficked trail. Once off the path, his altitude-induced cognitive decline destroyed his spatial awareness. Unable to process his surroundings or make rational decisions, he couldn't navigate back to the open snowfield where his friends expected to find him. Internet mysteries often focus on his rust-colored coat, claiming he should have been highly visible against the white snow. But if he wandered downhill into the tree line to relieve himself, that rust color perfectly camouflages him against the dead brush and pine needles. Landers was not abducted by Lemurians or cryptoterrestrials. He succumbed to severe illness, dehydration, and the freezing elements. He was swallowed by the snow, the ice, and the harsh reality of gravity. So why do thousands of people online vehemently prefer the cryptoterrestrial theory over verified medical facts? Because inventing supernatural monsters provides a comforting sense of order. If an underground alien took Carl Landers, there is intentionality. There is a villain. This narrative transforms a random, senseless tragedy into something with an actual purpose. Look at the staggering scale of Mount Shasta. It is a massive block of ice and rock that does not care if you are an experienced climber or a novice. The truth is that nature is completely indifferent to our survival. A single misstep, a bad stomach bug, or a slight drop in atmospheric oxygen is all it takes to permanently erase a human life. The science of human survival is scarier than any ghost story. If you want to explore more mysteries grounded in hard science, hit the like button, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on the Landers case down in the comments. Deep in the California wilderness, under the cover of a moonless night, a crew is working in total silence. A rope creaks against the bark of ancient trees as buckets of fresh earth are hauled up from a pitch-black void. This is Mount Shasta. It is a dormant volcano famous for its massive, saucer-like lenticular clouds and a history of folklore that makes it a magnet for the strange. The U.S. Forest Service maintains strict control over this land. Permits are mandatory, and groups are limited to 10 people to protect the fragile volcanic soil. Every hiker is meant to be accounted for. But in the mid-2000s, agents stumbled upon a massive breach of that security. Someone had manually excavated a crater 15 feet wide that plunged 60 feet straight into the mountain. Digging a shaft of this scale by hand requires weeks of silent, back-breaking labor and carries a high risk of being buried alive. To understand why someone would take such a lethal risk on federal land, we have to look at the prize they expected to find at the bottom. 19-year-old Brett Grimes saw an ad on an online message board looking for a hand to build a fence. When he arrived, there was no fence. Instead, he was told to descend into the earth and start digging. Brett spent his days at the bottom of a 60-foot dirt shaft with no shoring, the man-made support walls required for any safe excavation. One mistake, or one minor tremor in the volcanic rock, meant a lethal collapse with no hope of rescue. The operation was overseen by a man named Joseph, who wore a tailored suit and leather shoes to the muddy site every day. He enforced a strict code of secrecy. Whenever a boulder was pulled from the hole, the crew had to turn their backs while Joseph and a geologist inspected the center of the rock. Paranoia took hold of the crew in the final weeks. Realizing the illegality of the job, the local workers began hiking up early to stash firearms in the woods, fearing they were being set up as witnesses to a crime. The combination of armed guards, bizarre rituals, and a total lack of safety indicates a covert mission funded by a desperate true believer, rather than a standard construction project. Investigating agents initially suspected illegal gold mining. Shasta has a long history of prospectors trying to find leftover veins from the California gold rush. However, the geology suggests otherwise. Gold is typically associated with quartz, but the crew was specifically targeting light brown boulders with dark, ashy centers. Sinking a vertical 60-foot shaft into volcanic soil is an inefficient and illogical way to find gold. A second theory focused on the looting of Native American artifacts. Mount Shasta is the ancestral home of the Winnemem-Wintu tribe, and the area is rich with indigenous history. But artifact looting rarely involves a 60-foot vertical drop. Archaeological layers are found closer to the surface. You don't find ancient tools by systematically cracking open medicine ball-sized boulders at extreme depths. Ruling out gold and artifacts leaves us with an operation that consumed immense resources for no traditional economic gain. This indicates the project was fueled by an irrational, fanatical belief. In the 19th century, zoologist Philip Sclater proposed a theoretical land bridge called Lemuria to explain how primates migrated between India and Madagascar. While science eventually disproved the bridge, the legend of Lemuria survived in occult circles. It evolved into the myth of Telos, a golden city of advanced beings supposedly hidden deep inside the volcanic chambers of Mount Shasta. This mountain has long been a site of spiritual pilgrimage, from the 1987 harmonic convergence to the secretive I Am Foundation. Believers from all over the world come here to find a way into that subterranean city. Joseph's presence and the meticulous sampling of rock centers point toward this specific obsession. For a committed believer, this 60-foot shaft represents a physical bridge to the city they believe is waiting inside the mountain. The dig came to an abrupt, anticlimactic end. Before the crew could strike their target or suffer a catastrophic cave-in, the Forest Service discovered the operation and filled the hole with earth to protect the public. Filmmaker Elijah Sullivan explored the mystery in his documentary The Whole Story, but even with federal FOIA requests, the identity of Joseph and the specific group funding him remains a secret. The filled-in site is a physical monument to the psychological power of Mount Shasta. It shows the desire to find magic in reality is strong enough to lead people to break laws and risk their lives in the dark. Which theory do you believe explains the whole? Gold, artifacts, or Lemuria? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more deep dives into the strangest places. Rising abruptly from the surrounding landscape to over 14,000 feet, the isolated peak of Mount Shasta carries an undeniably eerie atmosphere. Take a look at this photograph. Looming directly over the summit is a massive, multi-layered stack of perfectly smooth white disks. It looks exactly like an alien mothership parking itself right on top of the volcano. These visual anomalies have fueled over a century of occult legends. Since the mid-19th century, people have claimed that an ancient race of Lemurians uses the mountain as a hidden refuge, while local lore insists interdimensional beings camouflage their spacecraft inside these massive formations. When confronted with perfectly symmetrical, massive shapes hovering in the sky, human psychology naturally leans towards science fiction. We invent cosmic horror stories to explain phenomena that look too deliberate to be accidental. The detail that convinces observers they are looking at physical spacecraft is absolute stillness. High up in the atmosphere, winds routinely scream at gale force, yet these massive disks refuse to budge. In reality, there is no metallic hull. These are altocumulus standing lenticularis clouds. The total stillness of the cloud is an optical illusion. What looks like a rigid, hovering object is actually a highly turbulent and dynamic atmospheric system, locked into a rapid, continuous loop. Mount Shasta is functioning as a massive, invisible fluid engine hiding in plain sight. Building this atmospheric engine requires two primary ingredients: a stable flow of moist air and a massive physical barrier placed directly in its path. Looking at this diagram, the mountain intercepts the airflow. Forced up the incline, the air expands and cools to the dew point. Invisible vapor condenses into liquid droplets, forming the cloud's leading edge. Descending the backside, the air contracts and warms, instantly evaporating the droplets. This rapid, perpetual cycle of condensation and evaporation is what causes the hovering illusion. The cloud is constantly being born on the upwind side and dying on the downwind side. It is regenerating so quickly that it appears frozen in place. That explains a single disk, but Mount Shasta frequently produces stacked pancake formations or a long series of ships trailing miles away from the peak. This happens because of a standing wave. This animated diagram illustrates the mechanics. Think of the mountain like a large rock submerged in a fast-moving stream. Fluid forced over the obstacle creates a series of bouncing, stationary ripples continuing downstream. The atmosphere acts the exact same way. Air cools at the top of every crest and warms at the bottom of every trough. Moisture selectively condenses right at those peaks, stacking clouds vertically or in a long procession across the sky. Because of its extreme isolation and immense size, Mount Shasta forces the invisible physics of our atmosphere into plain sight. That is the real reason it acts as a magnet for supernatural reports. While UFO hunters keep their eyes glued to the sky, indigenous cultures have focused their attention on the ground, protecting the mountain's tangible environment for thousands of years. For the Pit River, Karuk, Shasta, and Wintu tribes, this peak is central to their creation stories. They continue to travel to specific springs and meadows on the mountain to perform traditional purification rituals. In 1988, that active cultural practice faced a massive threat. The U.S. Forest Service approved special use permits for a sprawling commercial ski area directly over the mountain's upper elevations. Developers viewed the snowy slopes purely as a recreational commodity. By treating the site as empty terrain waiting to be capitalized on, they threatened to permanently damage a living cultural epicenter. The proposed base of the ski area sat dangerously close to Panther Meadow and its sacred spring. Looking at this photograph of the meadow today, you can see the modern markers of protection and restoration surrounding this exact high-altitude ecosystem. To block the development, the tribes and local citizen groups utilized Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, forcing the government to evaluate the mountain for the National Register of Historic Places. After years of intense lobbying, the government formally recognized the area above 8,000 feet as the Native American Cosmological District. In 1998, the Forest Service took the incredibly rare step of officially rescinding the ski permit. This image captures the physical restoration of the water channels in Panther Meadow following that victory. Mount Shasta does not require hidden Lemurian cities or interdimensional motherships to command awe. The immense fluid dynamics churning above its peak and the deep cultural reverence anchored to its slopes provide plenty of wonder on their own. Have you ever seen a lenticular cloud forming over a mountain? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the science behind the strange. In 1904, a British prospector named J.C. Brown walked out of the Californian wilderness with a story that defied logic. He claimed to have pierced the solid rock of Mount Shasta. Employed by a British mining company to search for gold, Brown said he had stumbled upon a hidden passage plunging deep into the heart of the volcano. It was an 11-mile, downward-sloping tunnel. He detailed an underground complex lined with crystal walls and tempered copper shields. Inside, he reported finding a central chamber containing 27 skeletons, some measuring up to 10 feet tall. Rather than haul the treasure out, Brown sealed the cave. For 3 decades, he kept the discovery quiet, leaving a rumor to ferment in the shadows of American folklore. His silence blurred the line between a historical hoax and a concealed truth waiting to be found. By June of 1934, Brown resurfaced in Stockton, California, finally ready to mount a retrieval expedition. He quickly organized a team of 80 eager scientists, miners, and volunteers to excavate the cavern. The group met twice daily for 6 weeks to meticulously plan the trip. The volunteers were so thoroughly convinced by his accounts that engineers and curators liquidated their assets and sold their homes just to fund their passage. The expedition never took a single step toward the mountain. On the exact morning the fleet of boats was set to depart, J.C. Brown vanished from his hotel. He left no note, no map to the cave, and his body was never found. 80 professionals had gambled their livelihoods on a stranger's word. To understand why this impossible story felt plausible to a room full of engineers and curators, we must look at the specific myths that had been quietly saturating the mountain for decades. Long before European prospectors arrived, the regional Klamath people understood Mount Shasta as a sacred site, explicitly defining the peak as the pillar of creation and the bridge between worlds. In their cosmology, the mountain was inhabited by the sky spirit Skell, who waged a fierce battle against Lao, the spirit of the underworld. They fought by hurling hot rocks and fire across the landscape, a mythology directly mirroring the region's intense volcanic eruptions. In the late 19th century, this ancient reverence merged with a new esoteric obsession sweeping through the country. Mystics began mapping the myth of Lemuria, a hypothetical sunken lost continent, onto the Californian landscape. In 1905, an author named Frederick Spencer Oliver published a book claiming that survivors of Lemuria were currently living inside Mount Shasta. Soon after, Rosicrucian writers popularized tales of highly advanced beings walking the mountain's surface in white robes and thriving in jeweled tunnels below the rock. When Brown arrived in Stockton to gather his crew in 1934, he was confirming what the public had already been reading about for 30 years. The doomed expedition was the inevitable result of decades of esoteric fiction slowly mutating into physical expectation in the minds of the American public. That expectation only grew stronger. While hiking on Mount Shasta in 1930, Guy Ballard reported encountering a mysterious figure who introduced himself as the Count of Saint Germain. This meeting sparked the I Am activity, a highly influential religious movement centered entirely around ascended masters, enlightened beings who supposedly used the mountain to guide humanity's spiritual development. As these new religious beliefs spread, followers began to reinterpret the physical reality of the environment. Every geological and meteorological quirk of the volcano was assigned a hidden divine purpose. Many spiritual groups perceive the mountain's distinctive lenticular clouds as cloaking devices for Lemurian motherships hovering in fixed positions above the peak. This localized concentration of belief acts like gravity for other fringe phenomena. The surrounding forests boast frequent Bigfoot sightings, rumors of restricted government zones, and reports of unexplained low-frequency hums vibrating through the rock. By the mid-20th century, the mountain functioned as an active, interdimensional terminal for American esotericism. Today, the town of Mount Shasta City relies heavily on this enduring mystique. Spiritual tourism is the largest contributor to the local economy, functioning as a foundational pillar for the community of 3,000 residents. This chart shows the thousands of visitors who obtain Forest Service permits each year. While many are traditional physical climbers, 35% explicitly travel for spiritual purposes. They engage in astral ascension, using the extreme altitude as a catalyst for mystical practice. This influx of seekers sustains a culture of frontier esotericism. Modern visionary artists, channelers, and perennial pilgrims constantly arrive to paint, photograph, and document their encounters, inventing new metaphysical meanings that keep the legend expanding. We may never solve the 1934 disappearance of J.C. Brown, nor find an 11-mile tunnel filled with 10-foot mummies, but the literal truth of those claims no longer matters. The sheer density of human belief has created a self-sustaining, real-world spiritual ecosystem. Mount Shasta's greatest power is its ability to endlessly reflect the human search for the unknown.